Few figures in modern history have left a mark as profound and controversial as Adolf Hitler. His name is forever associated with war, dictatorship, and one of the darkest chapters in human history. Yet before he became the ruler of Germany and the leader of the Nazi movement, Hitler was simply a child growing up in a small town on the border of Austria and Germany. Understanding his early years helps explain how an ordinary boy eventually became one of history's most influential and destructive political leaders. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in the town of Braunau am Inn, Austria-Hungary. The town was located near the German border, a geographical detail that would later influence Hitler's strong attachment to German nationalism. He was the fourth child of Alois and Clara Hitler. Sadly, several of his siblings died during childhood, a common tragedy in Europe during the late 19th century. Hitler's father, Alois Hitler, worked as a customs official. He was known as a strict, disciplined, and often authoritarian man. Alois expected obedience from his children and hoped that Adolf would follow a respectable career path within the civil service. However, young Adolf had very different ambitions. He disliked the idea of working as a government employee and dreamed instead of becoming an artist. Unlike his father, Clara Hitler was gentle, caring, and deeply devoted to her children. Historians generally agree that Adolf shared a particularly close relationship with his mother. Throughout his childhood, Clara offered emotional support and encouragement, helping him cope with the tensions that often existed between him and his father. During his early school years, Adolf performed reasonably well. Teachers described him as intelligent and capable when he applied himself. However, as he grew older, his academic performance became inconsistent. He frequently clashed with authority figures and lost interest in subjects that did not appeal to him. Instead, he became fascinated by history, architecture, and art. The young Adolf spent many hours drawing buildings, landscapes, and historical scenes. He admired grand architecture and dreamed of creating impressive structures that would inspire future generations. These artistic interests became central to his identity during adolescence. While many boys imagined military careers or business success, Adolf imagined himself as a painter and creative visionary. In 1898, the Hitler family moved to Linz, one of Austria's larger cities. The move exposed Adolf to a broader cultural environment and gave him greater access to artistic influences. Linz would become an important place in his memory, and he often spoke of the city later in life. Despite his artistic ambitions, family tensions continued. Alois Hitler strongly opposed his son's desire to pursue a career in art. He believed artistic work offered little stability and wanted Adolf to seek secure employment. These disagreements created frequent conflict within the household. A major turning point came in 1903 when Alois Hitler died unexpectedly. Adolf was only 13 years old. Although the relationship between father and son had often been difficult, the death significantly changed family life. Without his father's strict supervision, Adolf gained greater freedom to pursue his interests. For several years, Adolf continued his education but showed little enthusiasm for formal schooling. Eventually, he left school without obtaining advanced qualifications. By this time, he had become increasingly determined to enter the world of professional art. Another devastating event followed in 1907. Hitler's beloved mother, Clara, became seriously ill with breast cancer. Adolf watched helplessly as her health deteriorated. Her death in December 1907 deeply affected him. Many historians believe this was one of the most emotionally painful experiences of his life. Losing the person closest to him left him isolated and uncertain about the future. Despite his grief, Hitler remained committed to his artistic ambitions. In 1907, he applied for admission to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, one of the most prestigious art institutions in the region. Confident in his talent, he expected acceptance. The result was disappointing. The Academy rejected his application. Examiners acknowledged some ability in architectural drawing, but concluded that his artistic work did not meet the standards required for admission. The rejection was a major setback. For a young man who had built his identity around becoming an artist, the decision was devastating. Determined not to give up, Hitler applied again the following year. Once again, the Academy rejected him. This second failure forced him to confront an uncertain future. Without stable employment, family support, or formal qualifications, Hitler struggled financially. He remained in Vienna, hoping to survive through temporary work and the sale of small paintings and postcards. Life became increasingly difficult. At times, he lived in inexpensive hostels and shelters for men with limited income. Yet Vienna was more than a place of hardship. It was also a city filled with political debate, cultural diversity, and competing ideologies. The Austrian capital was home to people from many ethnic, linguistic, and religious backgrounds. Political parties promoted a wide range of ideas concerning nationalism, social reform, and the future of Europe. During these years, Hitler spent considerable time reading newspapers, attending public discussions, and observing political life. He developed strong opinions about society, government, and national identity. Many of the beliefs that later shaped his political career began to emerge during this period. At the same time, he continued studying architecture, history, and German culture. He admired grand public buildings and imagined dramatic transformations that could reshape entire cities. His fascination with architecture remained powerful even after his artistic career had stalled. By 1913, Hitler had spent several challenging years in Vienna. He had experienced personal loss, professional rejection, and economic hardship. Yet he also emerged from these years with increasingly strong political views and a growing sense of ambition. Seeking a fresh start, Adolf Hitler left Vienna and moved to Munich, Germany. He believed Germany offered greater opportunities and felt a strong cultural connection to the German nation. The move marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Within a year, Europe would be engulfed in a conflict like nothing the world had ever seen. The outbreak of war would transform Hitler's life forever and place him on a path towards politics, power, and eventual notoriety. In 1914, Europe stood on the edge of catastrophe. Political tensions, military rivalries, and complex alliances had created an atmosphere of uncertainty across the continent. When the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered a chain reaction among Europe's great powers, the world was plunged into what became known as the First World War. For millions of young men, the outbreak of war represented duty, adventure, and patriotism. Among them was Adolf Hitler, a 25-year-old Austrian living in Munich, Germany. Having struggled through years of poverty and disappointment in Vienna, Hitler saw the war as an opportunity to find purpose and belonging. When Germany mobilized its forces, Hitler enthusiastically volunteered for military service. Although he was technically an Austrian citizen, he was accepted into a Bavarian regiment. For the first time in years, he felt that he was part of something larger than himself. Military life suited Hitler in many ways. The structure, discipline, and sense of mission appealed to his personality. Unlike civilian life, where he had often felt isolated and unsuccessful, the army offered clear goals and a strong sense of community. Soon, Hitler was sent to the Western Front, where some of the war's fiercest battles would take place. The reality of trench warfare was brutal beyond imagination. Soldiers faced constant artillery bombardments, machine gun fire, disease, mud, hunger, and exhaustion. Entire units could be wiped out in a matter of hours. Hitler served primarily as a messenger, carrying communications between military headquarters and frontline units. The role was dangerous because it often required crossing areas exposed to enemy fire. On numerous occasions, Hitler risked his life while delivering important messages. Throughout the war, he earned a reputation for courage and reliability. His commanders praised his dedication and commitment to duty. In recognition of his service, Hitler received several military decorations, including the prestigious Iron Cross First Class, an award rarely granted to soldiers of his rank. The war left a profound impact on Hitler. He later described his years at the front as some of the most important experiences of his life. The army provided him with a sense of identity that he had struggled to find during his earlier years. However, Germany's military situation gradually deteriorated. Despite early successes, the country faced increasing economic hardship, resource shortages, and mounting casualties. By 1918, German forces were exhausted, while Allied armies continued advancing. In October 1918, Hitler was temporarily blinded during a gas attack. While recovering in a military hospital, he received shocking news. Germany had agreed to an armistice, effectively ending the war. For many Germans, the announcement was devastating. Millions had endured 4 years of sacrifice, believing victory was still possible. Now they faced defeat, political instability, and an uncertain future. Hitler reacted with anger and disbelief. He later claimed that Germany's surrender was one of the most painful moments of his life. The end of the war brought enormous changes. Germany's monarchy collapsed and a new democratic government known as the Weimar Republic took power. The country was struggling with economic crisis, social unrest, and political violence. Adding to these difficulties was the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919. The treaty imposed heavy financial reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions on Germany. Many Germans viewed the agreement as humiliating and unfair. The post-war years became a period of intense political conflict. Revolutionary groups, nationalist organizations, and competing political movements battled for influence across the country. Street clashes, protests, and attempted uprisings became common. Amid this unstable environment, Hitler remained in the army. One of his assignments involved monitoring political organizations that were emerging throughout Munich. During this work, he attended a meeting of a small group called the German Workers' Party. At first, the organization appeared insignificant. It had only a handful of members and limited influence. However, Hitler quickly became interested in its nationalist message and criticism of the post-war political system. During one meeting, he participated in a political debate and impressed party members with his speaking ability. His passionate arguments and confident delivery attracted attention. Party leaders soon invited him to join the party. Hitler accepted. What began as a minor political involvement would soon become the defining mission of his life. As a member of the German Workers' Party, Hitler discovered an unexpected talent: public speaking. He possessed the ability to hold audiences' attention, speak with intense emotion, and communicate political ideas in a way that energized supporters. His speeches attracted larger crowds, and his influence within the party grew rapidly. Before long, he became one of its most important figures. The organization eventually changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, commonly known as the Nazi Party. Under Hitler's growing leadership, the party adopted symbols, slogans, and propaganda techniques designed to strengthen its public image. The early 1920s were marked by severe economic hardship in Germany. Inflation spiraled out of control. Savings became worthless. Families struggled to purchase basic necessities. Public frustration created opportunities for political movements promising dramatic change. Hitler used this atmosphere to expand the Nazi Party's support. His speeches blamed Germany's problems on political leaders, the Treaty of Versailles, and various groups he claimed had harmed the nation. Large audiences attended his rallies, drawn by his promises of national renewal and stronger leadership. As his confidence increased, Hitler became convinced that political power could be seized through direct action. Inspired partly by political developments elsewhere in Europe, he planned an attempt to overthrow the Bavarian government and eventually march on Berlin. This effort became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. On November 8, 1923, Hitler and his supporters entered a large political gathering in Munich. They declared that a revolution had begun and attempted to gain support from local leaders. The plan quickly unraveled. Government authorities resisted the uprising, and the following day police confronted the marchers. Violence erupted in the streets. Several people were killed, and the coup attempt collapsed. Hitler was arrested and charged with treason. For many politicians, the failed uprising would have ended their careers forever. Yet the trial unexpectedly provided Hitler with a national platform. He used courtroom speeches to defend his actions and present himself as a patriotic nationalist. Newspapers across Germany reported his statements, making him far more famous than he had been before the coup attempt. The court found Hitler guilty and sentenced him to prison. Although the punishment appeared severe, his time behind bars would prove extremely important. Instead of disappearing from public life, he used imprisonment to reflect on strategy, organize his ideas, and plan for the future. He concluded that political power could not be achieved through an armed uprising alone. Instead, he believed that success would require building a mass political movement capable of gaining influence through legal means. As prison doors closed behind him, Adolf Hitler faced uncertainty. His attempted revolution had failed. His party was weakened. His future remained unclear. Yet within those prison walls, he began preparing for a second attempt, one that would eventually transform Germany and alter the course of world history. By the summer of 1939, Europe stood on the brink of another catastrophic conflict. Adolf Hitler had transformed Germany into a powerful military state, expanded its territory, and challenged the post-World War I order. Many world leaders hoped diplomacy could still prevent war, but events were moving rapidly toward confrontation. On September 1, 1939, German forces crossed the border into Poland. Using a military strategy known as blitzkrieg, or lightning war, German troops combined tanks, aircraft, and fast-moving infantry to overwhelm enemy defenses. The attack was swift and devastating. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The conflict that followed became World War II, the deadliest war in human history. For Hitler, the invasion of Poland represented the beginning of a campaign to expand German power across Europe. Early military operations appeared remarkably successful. Within weeks, Poland was defeated. The speed of Germany's victory shocked military observers around the world. Many governments realized that modern warfare had entered a new era. In 1940, Hitler turned his attention westward. German forces launched major offensives against Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Once again, blitzkrieg tactics achieved rapid success. European armies struggled to respond effectively to Germany's fast-moving attacks. One of the most dramatic events occurred during the Battle of France. German troops bypassed heavily fortified defensive positions and advanced deep into French territory. Within weeks, France collapsed. Paris fell. A nation considered one of Europe's strongest military powers had been defeated with astonishing speed. The victory represented the peak of Hitler's military prestige. Across much of Europe, Germany appeared unstoppable. Large portions of the continent came under German control or influence. Many observers wondered whether Britain would be the next country to fall. Hitler expected Britain to negotiate peace. Instead, Britain continued fighting. The struggle became known as the Battle of Britain. Unlike previous campaigns, this conflict was fought primarily in the skies. German aircraft launched bombing raids against military targets, industrial facilities, and major cities. British pilots and air defense systems resisted fiercely. Despite months of attacks, Germany failed to gain control of British airspace. The campaign marked Hitler's first significant strategic setback. Although Germany remained powerful, Britain had survived. Yet Hitler was already focused on an even more ambitious objective. For years, he had viewed the Soviet Union as both a political and military rival. He believed Germany needed additional territory and resources in Eastern Europe. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. More than 3 million Axis soldiers crossed into Soviet territory along a massive front stretching hundreds of miles. Initially, German forces achieved spectacular success. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded. Thousands of tanks and aircraft were destroyed. Millions of prisoners were captured. German troops advanced rapidly toward Moscow, Leningrad, and other major cities. Many believed the Soviet Union would soon collapse. However, the invasion encountered unexpected challenges. The vast distances of the Soviet Union complicated logistics. Supply lines became overstretched. Roads deteriorated under harsh conditions. Equipment suffered mechanical failures. Most importantly, Soviet resistance proved far stronger than German planners had anticipated. As winter approached, German forces found themselves increasingly exhausted and undersupplied. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Vehicles stopped functioning properly. Soldiers lacked adequate winter clothing. The advance slowed dramatically. The quick victory Hitler had expected failed to materialize. Meanwhile, the war expanded beyond Europe. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into the conflict. Soon afterward, Germany declared war on the United States. Now Hitler faced an alliance that included Britain, the Soviet Union, and the rapidly growing industrial power of America. The scale of the conflict became truly global. During these years, Nazi authorities also carried out systematic persecution and mass murder against millions of people, including Jewish communities across Europe. This campaign became known as the Holocaust. Concentration camps and extermination centers were established throughout occupied territories. Millions of innocent men, women, and children were murdered. The Holocaust remains one of the darkest crimes in human history and continues to be studied as a warning about the consequences of hatred, racism, and unchecked political power. While these atrocities unfolded, military conditions gradually turned against Germany. One of the most important turning points came during the Battle of Stalingrad in 1942 and 1943. Hitler viewed the city as strategically and symbolically important. German forces launched a major offensive to capture it. The battle became one of the bloodiest in history. Street by street, building by building, soldiers fought in brutal urban combat. As winter returned, Soviet forces launched a massive counteroffensive. German troops were surrounded. Despite warnings from military commanders, Hitler refused to authorize an immediate withdrawal. The trapped army suffered enormous losses. In February 1943, the remaining German forces surrendered. The defeat shocked Germany and the world. For the first time, a major German army had been completely destroyed. The psychological impact was enormous. After Stalingrad, Germany increasingly shifted from offensive operations to defense. The momentum of war had changed. Throughout 1943 and 1944, Allied forces continued advancing on multiple fronts. In North Africa, German and Italian forces suffered defeat. In Italy, Allied armies pushed northward after the fall of Mussolini's government. Meanwhile, Allied bombers launched extensive attacks against German industrial centers, transportation networks, and military facilities. German cities experienced widespread destruction. Factories struggled to maintain production. Civilian morale weakened under constant bombardment. Despite mounting challenges, Hitler remained determined to continue fighting. He often rejected proposals for strategic retreats, insisting that positions be held at all costs. These decisions sometimes increased military losses and complicated efforts to stabilize defensive lines. The most dramatic Allied operation in Western Europe occurred on June 6, 1944. Known as D-Day, the invasion involved thousands of ships, aircraft, and soldiers crossing the English Channel to land in Normandy, France. The operation succeeded. Allied forces established a foothold in Western Europe and began advancing toward Germany. For Hitler, the consequences were severe. Germany now faced major offensives from both east and west. Soviet armies advanced steadily toward Berlin from the east. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces pushed forward from the west. The military situation deteriorated rapidly. Resources became scarce. Fuel shortages increased. Equipment losses mounted. Experienced soldiers were increasingly difficult to replace. The powerful empire that Hitler had built was beginning to crumble. The victories of 1939 and 1940 seemed distant memories. Military defeat was becoming inevitable. Yet Hitler continued believing that determination, new weapons, or unexpected political developments might reverse Germany's fortunes. Yet as 1944 drew to a close, reality became impossible to ignore. Germany was losing the war. Enemy armies were approaching from every direction. Cities lay in ruins. Millions had already died. And Adolf Hitler, once the most powerful man in Europe, was preparing to face the collapse of everything he had built. When Adolf Hitler entered prison in 1924 following the failed beer hall putsch, many observers believed his political career was over. His attempt to overthrow the government had failed, his party was weakened, and he faced public criticism. Yet history would prove otherwise. Rather than ending his ambitions, imprisonment became a period of planning and reflection. During his time in prison, Hitler dictated much of a book that would later become one of the most controversial political texts of the 20th century, Mein Kampf. The book combined autobiography, political ideology, and Hitler's vision for Germany's future. Although sales were initially limited, the work later became widely distributed as his political influence expanded. After serving only a portion of his sentence, Hitler was released from prison in December 1924. He returned to a political landscape that had changed significantly. Germany's economy had stabilized somewhat, and public support for extremist political movements had temporarily declined. Hitler understood that another violent coup would likely fail. Instead, he adopted a new strategy, achieving power through legal and political means. His first task was rebuilding the Nazi Party. The organization had been weakened after the beer hall putsch, and many supporters had become discouraged. Hitler worked tirelessly to reorganize the movement, strengthen its leadership structure, and expand its presence across Germany. Under his direction, local party branches were established throughout the country. Recruitment campaigns targeted workers, farmers, business owners, students, and veterans. The goal was to create a nationwide political organization capable of competing in elections. At the same time, Hitler refined his skills as a public speaker. His speeches became increasingly sophisticated and emotionally powerful. He often spoke for hours, presenting himself as a leader who could restore Germany's strength and national pride. Large audiences gathered to hear him speak. Another important factor in the Nazi Party's growth was propaganda. Hitler understood the importance of influencing public opinion. The party used posters, newspapers, rallies, symbols, and slogans to communicate its message. Every campaign was carefully designed to attract attention and create a strong emotional impact. One of Hitler's closest associates, Joseph Goebbels, became particularly influential in developing propaganda strategies. Through modern communication techniques, the Nazi Party was able to reach millions of Germans. Despite these efforts, electoral success remained limited during the mid-1920s. Germany's economy was relatively stable, and many voters preferred moderate political parties. Everything changed in 1929. That year, the global economy entered a severe crisis known as the Great Depression. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and unemployment soared. Millions of Germans lost their jobs and struggled to support their families. Economic hardship created widespread frustration and uncertainty. Many citizens lost confidence in traditional political leaders and searched for alternatives. Hitler and the Nazi Party seized this opportunity. They promised economic recovery, stronger government, national unity, and an end to the humiliation associated with the Treaty of Versailles. Their message appealed to many Germans who felt abandoned by existing political institutions. As the economic crisis deepened, support for the Nazi Party increased dramatically. In election after election, the party gained more votes and more seats in parliament. By the early 1930s, it had become one of Germany's largest political movements. Hitler's personal popularity also continued to grow. To supporters, he appeared confident, determined, and capable of leading Germany through difficult times. However, political instability remained severe. Governments frequently collapsed, coalitions struggled to maintain authority, parliament became increasingly divided and ineffective. Amid this chaos, influential political leaders and business figures began discussing the possibility of bringing Hitler into government. Some believed they could control him while benefiting from his popular support. This assumption would prove to be a historic mistake. On January 30th, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. For Hitler, it was an achievement of a goal he had pursued for nearly a decade. Yet becoming Chancellor was only the beginning. Hitler immediately began consolidating power. Within weeks, a dramatic event changed Germany's political landscape. In February 1933, the Reichstag building, home of the German parliament, was destroyed by fire. The government declared a state of emergency. Civil liberties were restricted, and authorities gained expanded powers to arrest political opponents. Using these emergency measures, the Nazi leadership moved quickly against rival parties and critics. Soon afterwards, the German parliament passed the Enabling Act of 1933. This legislation granted Hitler's government the authority to enact laws without parliamentary approval. This law effectively transferred enormous power to Hitler and his cabinet. Over the following months, opposition parties were banned or dissolved. Independent labor unions were eliminated. Political dissent became increasingly dangerous. Germany was transformed into a one-party state. the Nazi Party now controlled nearly every aspect of political life. After President Hindenburg died in 1934, Hitler merged the positions of president and chancellor. He adopted the title Führer, meaning leader. At this point, he possessed unprecedented authority. The German military swore personal loyalty to him. Government institutions operated under his direction. Political opposition had been largely suppressed. Meanwhile, the regime launched extensive public works programs designed to reduce unemployment and stimulate economic activity. Infrastructure projects, including highways and public construction initiatives, created jobs for thousands of workers. Economic conditions improved in several areas, strengthening support among many citizens. At the same time, the government expanded military production despite restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Factories produced weapons, aircraft, tanks, and military equipment. Germany's armed forces grew rapidly, transforming the country into one of Europe's strongest military powers. Hitler also pursued an ambitious foreign policy. In 1936, German troops entered the Rhineland, a region previously restricted by international agreements. The move faced little resistance. Encouraged by this success, Hitler continued expanding German influence. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in an event known as the Anschluss. Later that year, German leaders gained control of the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia following international negotiations. Each success increased Hitler's popularity at home. Many Germans viewed these actions as restoring national pride and reversing the consequences of World War I. Yet beneath the surface, tensions were growing. European leaders became increasingly concerned about Germany's ambitions. Diplomacy struggled to contain the escalating crisis. Hitler, however, remained determined to expand Germany's power further. Throughout the late 1930s, military preparations accelerated. Strategic plans were developed for future territorial expansion. The world stood dangerously close to another major conflict. By 1939, Adolf Hitler had achieved what once seemed impossible. The struggling artist from Vienna had become the ruler of Germany. He controlled one of Europe's most powerful governments. He commanded a rapidly growing military. He enjoyed widespread influence over German society. But his ambitions extended far beyond Germany's borders. Within months, decisions made in Berlin would ignite a war that would engulf continents, claim millions of lives, and reshape the course of human history forever. By early 1945, the end of Nazi Germany was rapidly approaching. The war that Adolf Hitler had launched 6 years earlier had devastated much of Europe. Millions of soldiers and civilians had lost their lives. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. Germany, once at the height of military power, now faced defeat on every front. From the east, Soviet forces advanced steadily toward Berlin. From the west, American, British, Canadian, and Allied armies crossed deep into German territory. The Third Reich, which Hitler had promised would last for 1,000 years, was collapsing after only 12. Yet despite overwhelming evidence, Hitler refused to accept reality. Inside his headquarters, military commanders delivered increasingly grim reports. Entire divisions had been destroyed, fuel supplies were nearly exhausted, communication networks were breaking down, transportation systems had been severely damaged by Allied bombing campaigns. Still, Hitler continued issuing orders for counterattacks and offensives that often existed only on maps. Many senior officers understood that victory was impossible. Some attempted to persuade Hitler to negotiate peace or allow military withdrawals. Others feared speaking honestly because of the consequences. As Germany's situation worsened, Hitler withdrew from public life. He spent most of his remaining months inside the Führer bunker, an underground bunker complex located beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. Protected by thick concrete walls, the bunker became the final headquarters of the Nazi regime. Inside, a small group of military officers, government officials, secretaries, and loyal associates remained at Hitler's side. Above ground, Berlin was under constant attack. Artillery shells exploded throughout the city, buildings collapsed, roads became impassable. Thousands of civilians sought shelter while Soviet forces closed in from multiple directions. The sounds of war echoed day and night. Within the bunker, Hitler's physical and emotional condition appeared to deteriorate. Witnesses described him as increasingly isolated, exhausted, and frustrated by military failures. He spent long hours reviewing maps and discussing military operations, even as German defenses crumbled around the capital. Despite the hopeless situation, Hitler continued believing that Germany might somehow avoid total defeat. Some of his final plans depended on armies that no longer existed or lacked the strength to carry out assigned missions. Reality and expectation grew further apart with each passing day. Meanwhile, many leading Nazi officials began fleeing Berlin. Some hoped to escape Allied capture. Others attempted to establish new centers of government outside the capital. The unity that had once characterized the Nazi leadership was rapidly disappearing. One of the most significant events during Hitler's final days occurred on April 29, 1945. Inside the bunker, he married Eva Braun, his longtime companion. The ceremony was brief and attended by only a small number of people. For years, Eva Braun had remained largely outside public political life, despite her close relationship with Hitler. Now, as Germany collapsed around them, the two were officially married. Following the ceremony, Hitler dictated his final political statements and personal testament. In these documents, he reflected on the war, appointed successors for certain government positions, and outlined his wishes regarding events after his death. Outside the bunker, Soviet troops were advancing block by block through Berlin. German resistance was weakening rapidly. The city's fall was only a matter of time. By April 30, 1945, Hitler concluded that capture was inevitable. Rather than surrender, he chose to end his life. That afternoon, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun died inside the bunker. According to historical investigations and witness accounts, Hitler died by suicide, while Eva Braun also took her own life. Following Hitler's instructions, their bodies were taken outside, burned, and buried in a shallow crater near the Reich Chancellery. News of Hitler's death spread gradually through Germany and the world. For many Germans, it marked the definitive end of an era. For Allied nations, it signaled that final victory was near. Yet fighting continued for several more days. On May 7, 1945, German representatives signed documents agreeing to unconditional surrender. The surrender officially took effect on May 8, celebrated as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. Across Europe, crowds gathered in streets and public squares to celebrate the end of war on the continent. Church bells rang, flags waved, people embraced strangers in moments of relief and joy. After years of destruction and uncertainty, peace had finally returned to Europe. The aftermath of the war revealed the enormous scale of devastation. Entire cities had been destroyed, millions of refugees were displaced, infrastructure lay in ruins. Families across countless nations mourned loved ones lost during the conflict. Investigators also uncovered evidence of the Holocaust and other wartime atrocities committed under Nazi rule. The shocking discoveries horrified the international community. In response, Allied governments organized a series of legal proceedings known as the Nuremberg trials. These trials prosecuted major Nazi leaders and established important legal principles regarding war crimes, crimes against humanity, and individual responsibility under international law. The proceedings demonstrated that political and military leaders could be held accountable for their actions. The legacy of Adolf Hitler remains one of the most studied subjects in modern history. Historians continue examining how he rose from relative obscurity to become the ruler of Germany. Researchers analyze the political, economic, and social conditions that enabled his ascent to power. They also investigate how propaganda, nationalism, authoritarianism, and political instability contributed to the development of Nazi Germany. The consequences of Hitler's decisions reshaped the modern world. World War II resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people. National borders changed. International organizations were created. New alliances emerged. Technological and scientific developments accelerated. The global balance of power shifted dramatically. The lessons of this period remain relevant today. Many educators, historians, and political leaders study the era as a warning about the dangers of extremism, intolerance, racism, dictatorship, and unchecked political authority. Remembering the events of the Second World War helps societies understand the importance of democratic institutions, human rights, and peaceful international cooperation. More than 80 years after his death, Adolf Hitler remains one of history's most controversial and consequential figures. His rise demonstrated how economic hardship, political instability, and persuasive propaganda can transform nations. His rule illustrated the destructive potential of authoritarian power. And his downfall showed that even the most powerful regimes can ultimately collapse under the weight of war, violence, and their own ambitions. The story of Adolf Hitler is not merely the biography of one individual. It is also the story of a world transformed by conflict, ideology, and political change. It is a reminder of humanity's capacity for both destruction and resilience.